Hello and welcome. My name is Kyle Knapp, and today we will be looking at the cost of operation of the vehicles the aircraft that we have selected for consideration for purchasing for the flight department of Wilson Enterprises. So let's get started. So just to kind of review, we're going to be reviewing each aircraft and kind of what they do and how they fit the needs of the company. First, the Nextant 400 XTI. You've seen all this information before, but just keep in mind and take another good look at the price, what the cruise speed is, and some of these values like payload range and stuff like that, as that'll be kind of more important later on. This is a smaller jet, and it's probably best for kind of maybe mid to farther range operations, but it just doesn't have a lot of cabin volume as much as the company really needs. The Piaggio P180 is a turbine propeller airplane, and this one is much better. It's a little bit more expensive, $3 million more expensive, much better value factor, much more cabin volume. This one is a lot cheaper to operate, and you'll see that as when we get to the final slide for the presentation. But for now, just keep in mind that this one has better cabin volume, better value factor, a little bit more expensive for the initial purchase price, but is a little bit slower than all the other aircraft. This is the slowest aircraft, and so the important thing to realize about this is that with the company, most of our trips are on the shorter end. 300 nautical miles is usually about the mean trip length, and so we don't really need a super fast aircraft, because as long as we have one that's sufficiently fast, it only adds an extra few minutes if we use the slowest of these aircraft. So moving on, the Legacy 450. This is a big jump in jet. This one is $16,570,000 initial purchase price. But you're paying for a lot more here. You're paying for much more value factor, much more cabin volume, cruise speed, huge payload range compared to the Piaggio P180, and even more than the Nextant 400 XTI. And then lastly, the one that we had looked at was the Gulfstream G280. This is the most expensive. Again, you're getting the most out of it. Lots of value factor, cabin volume, huge payload range. This definitely opens the options up for international travel, and is a good option if we're looking at the more expensive end of things. So the important part of all of this, and why we're kind of going through this all, is we want to find what's going to meet the company's needs and what's going to be the best option for the company based on the price and the cost that it takes to operate. So kind of looking at that first block, we get like the block speed. Like I said earlier, the Piaggio P180 is the slowest of the aircraft. And what you'll see below that, you can kind of compare the airspeeds there, but below that is the yearly hours, and that's basically how many flight hours it will take for the aircraft to accomplish the same amount of travel as what we've recorded in previous years from the COO. So for example, the Legacy 450 is going to accomplish all of the missions, all the necessary travel in 300 hours, whereas the Piaggio P180 is going to do the same thing, go to the same airports, do the same travel in 353 hours. And so you can kind of see that breakdown between the Nextant 400 XTI, Legacy 450, and the Gulfstream G280. They're pretty close. There's not a huge difference. A little bit bigger of a difference between the Piaggio P180 and the Legacy 450, difference of 53 hours, but ultimately in the end, that's something that I don't think is very important, considering what you see below that. Now, the line below, you'll see the yearly fixed cost. And the huge difference here is look at the difference between the Nextant 400 XTI, and the Piaggio P180 compared to the next two aircraft, the Legacy 450 and Gulfstream G280. I mean, you're talking more than double the yearly fixed costs for those aircraft. And frankly, I just don't know if 53 hours of travel time is worth that extra $300,000-$400,000 in fixed costs. And on top of that, if you look below, you'll see the purchase price. I mean, you're paying 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 times as much compared to the Nextant 400 XTI or the Piaggio P180. And then below that, we kind of have the yearly cost, what it takes to operate. Below that, the hourly cost and the cost per hour. The hourly cost is for a 300 nautical mile mission, while the cost per hour is just a breakdown per hour. And you can kind of see how each of those aircraft break down and what the related costs are. So as you can see, the Piaggio P180 is by far the cheapest aircraft. That's across the board for maintenance, fuel costs, travel, everything. The Piaggio P180 is the cheapest, and I think it's the best option, frankly, for the company because it's the cheapest, and I think you get the most bang for your buck. You don't have a huge purchase price. Your yearly costs are really, really cheap compared to the other aircraft. Hourly costs are down, and you can just accomplish those 300 nautical mile missions for the cheapest compared to all the other aircraft. So that's why I kind of recommend that. Now, another question is charter an option? And the answer is yes and no. Charter is an option, but it costs nearly $5,000 per hour. And so for 300 hours worth of travel, roughly, it would cost $1.5 million. And so, you kind of compare that to what we were looking at earlier, which was like $600,000, $700,000 at the high end. It would cost nearly double that for charter. And granted, there's certain costs that aren't there, like there's no purchase, no debt incursion, no recurring fees, and frankly, it is a great option for short-term travel. But in the long term, if we're looking for multiple company missions of 300 hours or more, charter is just not an option. It just is too expensive in the long term. Whereas if we're doing on demand, where we're purchasing our own plane, and we just take in that initial debt and pay off those lower hourly costs, in the long run, any one of those aircraft is going to be cheaper. So for the company's needs, charter is not an option. We can use it as a resource for last minute missions, or in a case of emergencies, or maybe if the aircraft is down for maintenance. But charter should not be what we rely on, because it's just frankly too expensive. So this is a breakdown of what it would look like for 100% versus a 20% initial down payment. And as you can see, the red line there that is consistent between the two graphs, that represents the charter. So and the orange line is the Gulfstream G280, the light blue one is the Legacy 450, the purple one is the Piaggio P180, and the lime green one is the Nextant 400 XTI. So as you can see, the Piaggio P180 in purple is the cheapest, no matter where you're at, in at least the first 200 hours, like 300 hours, all across the board. If you're paying with 100% initial down payment, it's going to be the cheapest no matter what. And so, yeah, that's why I kind of recommend the Piaggio P180, because it suits the company's needs, and in the long term, it's the cheapest for making those hourly missions. I would recommend coming up with the $7 million to make the 100% initial down payment. Company policy, we don't really want to incur too much debt, so I recommend that we, have the money in full and just purchase it from the get-go. And so that kind of concludes my personal choice of which aircraft to purchase for the company and to start building the fleet for the flight department. I would recommend the Piaggio P180 as the initial company purchase. you for your time, and I hope you have a great day.